Okay, no software. That was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and I won't be teaching you anything. I stopped at like C+ or C++, which was not my grade. Okay, so we are going to learn to code. One of the things that I don't know if you all notice in your discussions on social media or talking with other tax pros is how rare it is for people to actually get to the substantial authority that underlies their opinions. And some of that is fear-based because, let's face it, the code is written law, and it's not written by people who are, as a literature major, not particularly proficient with the English language. It's Congress and their staffers. It gets weird fast. What my goal is for this class is to help you overcome some of your reluctance to dig into the code and the associated regulations, because, especially with the regs, that's where the meat is. That's where you're going to find the answers to all of those questions that are constantly posed on social media. And sometimes by your own clients. They come in with a tricky situation. You're like, wow, I've never seen that before, even though I've been in practice for 40 years. So we're going to talk about how to get into the code and some of the fine print on some of the most common code sections that you may have forgotten or never knew. So we're going to talk about gross income. That's my favorite. I'm a nerd. I have a favorite code section, 61. We are going to talk a little bit about the Section 121 exclusion. Lots of people know that code section. There's a lot of fine print to that section. We're going to talk in depth, reasonably in depth, about how the IRS makes a not engaged in for profit, or what we call the hobby loss rules. Hobby loss rules used to be, people were trying to create an artificial loss on a Schedule C to reduce their tax burden. Gig economy has changed that a little bit. And so those activities not engaged in for profit are being evaluated a little differently, or we're seeing a lot more of that. It's not just wealthier taxpayers creating a business that's losing money, which isn't really a business if you do it consistently. We are going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite things, ethics and disclosure, consent to use or disclose taxpayer information under IRC 7216. And we're going to talk about the mailbox rule, and again, some of the fine print that goes along with that. Gross income, IRC 61. All income from whatever source derived. Now, there's a 14-item list on this. It includes compensation for services, including fees, commissions, fringe benefits, and similar items. Gross income derived from business, gains derived from dealings in property. It includes bartering, which it doesn't say specifically. It includes everything unless. It's really short. There's a 14-item list, but literally anything, unless there's a specific exception, is gross income. So the regs and all of the cross-references associated in the regs contain a huge amount of information. I'm going to talk a lot because most of you know these code sections and you're kind of familiar, but we had a question on social media that someone gave her staff luxury handbags. Now, if you know, Josh and I are big fans of the Birkin. Not that we will ever see one. But I don't know when she talks about luxury handbags if we're talking, Coach level or Birkin level. But in any case, gave the staff luxury handbags and as gifts because whatever they were selling, it was helping them with their marketing. Wanted to put that down as a marketing expense or as gifts. Now, do we have a problem with this? What are those handbags? Compensation. I'm talking to a room full of enrolled agents. I expect you to know that. The issue is, and why we're talking about code sections, is because everybody knows that's compensation, but no. The people you meet on the day-to-day, even those holding themselves out as practitioners, may not always know that. And so we're here, so you're going to be like, IRC 61, it's all income unless it isn't. And we're going to talk about that as a form of compensation, and that goes to the regs. I haven't, Glenn Glass. This is like a defining case as far as what makes income, and there's a three-prong test. Accession to wealth, huge. I can't tell you how many questions I've answered on social media before it just got the better of me and I gave up trying. How many questions on social media were, does this person have more now than they had before? Was it a situation where they were made whole, or was it a situation where they actually moved above where they were before? It has to be clearly realized. We're going to talk about that in a sec. And you have to have complete dominion and control. That's the three-prong test set out in this case. This case was from the, I want to say the 1950s. I've got a note here somewhere. 55. Yes, the front rows, some of them are studying for their tax court exams, so they're going to be able to drop this stuff for me on the fly. So let's talk for a minute about clearly realized. How many of you have heard of the Moore case? Moore, the Supreme Court ruled on it finally back in June. And the Moores, thank you. The Moores were arguing that a certain chunk of their income, it's a big old long case, has to do with controlled foreign corporations. That income was not realized. But the situation is the tax code defines that particular type of income as pass-through. It was realized by the corporation, which was in India, and then it was passed through to the Moores, and the Moores were arguing, no, we never, how many of you get this from your clients? We never saw any of that money. None of those dividends, none of that. It didn't hit our pocket. Partners in partnerships. I didn't get any money from the partnership. Doesn't matter. There is a realization component. That's part of Glenshaw Glass. That's what's underlying what's making income. Do you have any questions on that? Any weirdness? Very basic. But you wouldn't be surprised at how many times complicated questions can be trimmed down to, was there an accession to wealth? Was it clearly realized? Does the taxpayer have dominion and control? Oh, I saw the thing. I guess it's a TikTok thing going around right now. Deposit the check in January. You know? I mean, again and again and again we see these things. And you guys know this. My goal here is to remind you where to know this. And when your clients come to you with these crazy arguments, you remember, oh yeah, Amber talked about that, 61. I'm going to get right in there to the regs, and I'm just going to throw some law at them, at the clients, because it's annoying, right? It's annoying when they question your knowledge, and you've been doing this so long. You feel like, why am I being put on the spot? But you can come back. You have a comeback. It's like, I don't care what you saw on TikTok. I'm in the law. And the law says, and I'm here to defend you. 121, another one. We all pretty much know 121. Very straightforward, but there's bad news potential. $250,000 limit per individual. It can often surprise clients, again, less knowledgeable clients. They think, oh, well, I sold my house. They either they fall into one of two buckets. They fall into the, oh my gosh, I sold my house and I didn't pay very much for it, and oh, what kind of damage is that going to do to me? Or they fall into the, I sold my house in California that I bought in the 1970s, and none of that's taxable. Yeah, I've had a couple of those. One of the things you can do on this is it's once every 2 years. It's for the taxpayer's principal residence. And we'll talk about that in a minute. You can help your clients sometimes. I don't know, You can help your clients if they're good record keepers. How many of your clients are good record keepers or, or decent record keepers? So I was going through my father's paperwork. My father and my mother. My mother was who I got the business from, so she was a very good record keeper, and my dad's kind of a hoarder. And so I actually was able to find receipts for most of the improvements that they had done to their principal residence over the years, which is going to help me with my adjusted basis in that house. That's one of those things that you want to ask your clients. I teach practice management, so I do talk a lot about best practices for your clients. The other thing you need to talk about is mixed-use property. If a portion of the house was used for business or the residence. Now, the single biggest question on that, how many of you were here last year and took some of Natalie's classes? Yeah, Natalie is the real estate goddess, okay? She's forgotten more than I know about any kind of real estate tax. But one of the things, a critical distinction is the mixed use in New Mexico we have casitas. So little, kind of like a she shed. ADUs, okay. A she shed, yeah. And so New Mexico's kind of an art place, and so a lot of those folks will use the casita or the ADU as a studio. There's a distinction to be made, one that's critical. Is that ADU detached from the house, or is it a home office inside the house? Because the mixed-use property, and again, I'm not here to go over the fine print. Natalie's who you want to talk to for that, or get into the regs, but understand when your client sells a principal residence that consists of an additional dwelling unit, that they've been using as business property, that whether it's detached or part of where they dwell is going to matter. 250K limitation is per individual, not per sale. MFJ, QSS. QSS is qualified surviving spouse, replaced widow or widower. Up to 250K per unmarried individual. The IRS has acknowledged that people do live together. They aren't always married, and sometimes they even buy a home. But it must be allocated according to the interest each individual has. So in New Mexico, we're a community property state, but if the individuals are unmarried, has no bearing. You can't double dip the limitation, meaning the deduction needs to add up to 100%. You can't have somebody take $250,000, which is 70%, and then have another person take also $250,000, which is 70%. I probably didn't explain that very well, but you guys get it, right? You can't double dip the limitation. It has to be allocated according to interest. Interest can't add up to more than 100%. Oh, great. No, I like teaching new tax pros. If he's filing, okay, so there's one big it depends in there, okay? As far as step-up goes, and this is important, New York's not a community property state, but where I come from it is, and the surviving spouse gets full step-up. This saved a California client for me. The other thing is, again, they've got to be filing that married filing jointly return for that tax year. She died right, okay. So we're going to look up Gallenstein, and I apologize for not knowing that. But again, in a comp-prop state, it's just automatic. You're full step-up. In non-comp-prop, the court case is protecting you. Yeah. The once every two, in the back, for a sale that occurred prior to 1977. It's not going to happen too often these days. Okay, there's this huge gap. So back to this. In a comp-prop state, the spouse is going to get full step-up. In California, my surviving spouse got full step-up. That house was now 100% hers. Once every 2 years, can be suspended for military service. You can get, that goes out to 10 years, nope, 5, my bad, 5. The 5-year period ends on the date of sale. One thing I learned from Natalie last year, 2 years, 5 years are based on number of days, not calendar years. So it's really important if you're looking at a partial exclusion due to, 2 really quick sales that don't have an exception, to count the number of days. Also, these years do not necessarily have to be consecutive. You can get a reduced exclusion in certain circumstances. And again, this is not a class completely on 121. This is to tell you, go to Code Section 121, hit those regulations, and look it up. You can frame your question to me, but I don't do real good at answering on the fly. And that answer, by the way, is probably explained much better in your text. I'm a writer. I love teaching you guys. I love talking to you guys. But in the end, I'm a writer, and you guys have a full text on this. So a lot more detail there. And you guys, if you've ever taken my class, I'm sure you've heard me say that 100 times. Military Foreign Service, I just lied to myself. It is 10 years. Okay? I'm just going to go for my notes. You can't be flipping your personal residence, okay, to get the full benefit of 120. I'm just going to be a house flipper, but I'm going to live in it, okay? That's going to be on TikTok one of these days. It has to be your principal residence for 2 of the previous 5 years. Those years don't have to be consecutive, and they count by days, so 750, whatever. And conversely, if you own that house, you've owned it, then you turn it into a rental, but you sell it the following year. Maybe the market's bad, you didn't have time, whatever. Military, Foreign Service, principal residence for 2 of the last 10 years. In the end, there can be only one principal residence. People can have multiple abodes, okay? Many of us probably have clients with multiple abodes. Principal residence, as most of you know, are going to depend on certain factors. And again, the factors are in the regs. Where is the taxpayer employed? What's the abode of the taxpayer's family members? Where is the driver's license? Where is the mailing address? Now, I just taught in Alaska, and one of my Alaska students was moving to Florida. And she was doing everything in her power to try to make her abode Florida. But the bottom line is, when you look at all the regs, it's Alaska. Where are your bills coming to? Where are you registered to vote? Where do you go to church? And you guys have all heard this. But again, one residence. The exception, obviously, for care home situations. And there's fine print on it. It's in your text. When, most of us are in the position where our parents are getting older. When your parents move into a care home, there's a time limit, clock starts ticking, but the parent can live in the care home. Mixed use, we already talked about this. Mixed use property, business or personal, within the dwelling unit, do you have 1 sale or 2? Okay, if you've got clients, I don't know how y'all do this. Do y'all have clients that are farmers or ranchers? We have ranchers in New Mexico, farmers too. Sometimes, as we all know, the dwelling unit gets sold separately from the ranch or the farmland and the outbuildings. All things that you need to consider for that 121 exclusion. If you've got people who are carving out their property, you need to take a look at this. Here's where I live, 183. Not engaged in for profit or the hobby loss rules. Is the gig work a side hustle? Is it a business or is it a hobby? You guys have sales tax here, yes? Do you pay sales? Yeah, it's a whopper probably. Do y'all pay sales tax on services? So in New Mexico, there's a gross receipts tax on services. And this is important because it's going to tag, if you have clients, do you have clients that move around? Oh, we want you to keep doing our taxes, but we're going to retire in Santa Fe? Yeah. We're going to retire in Santa Fe, and we're going to set up a little side hustle, a little thing to bring in some extra income. In New Mexico, there are gross receipts tax on services. So when you just throw something onto Schedule C, even if it's a business, you have put that person into business in New Mexico. They have a gross receipts filing and sometimes payment issue. It can, depending on, the infamous Schedule C or Schedule E debate, and I am not opening that can of worms, kids. Natalie does a great class on that one, too. I've got some best practices here. How many of you have clients who come to you and they've heard, and it's like the next big thing, and we're going to do this thing, and it's one of those things where you're looking at this person, it's just like, I don't think that's going to happen. I will often counsel my clients, even though, everybody's got that deduction mindset. Can I write it off? Can I write it off? I will often counsel clients to run that business as a hobby while they get their wheels under them and truly understand what I call their threshold for administrative pain. Because let's face it, running a business comes with a certain amount of admin work, and unless you're going to hire that out, you've got a lot of record keeping and other things, and people will sometimes do this. Oh, I'm starting a business, and then they're like, you look at it and you're like, this is not a business, okay? And they're, but we want to write it off, and it's like, yeah. So you need to have these frank and open conversations with your clients, because I always talk in my classes about, it's not so much can you do it or what are you going to do, it's can you defend it. And the determination of whether something's a business or a hobby is completely facts and circumstances based. Clearly it's important for people that are gig workers or those with side hustles because everybody wants to deduct their expenses, but what do they forget about? The SE tax. A few years ago I wrote an article in Forbes about the mechanics of Form 1040. And it was a couple years ago, December. Anyway, it talks about how for a self-employed person, people don't understand that they can have no income tax at all, but they owe a whack of self-employment tax. What do you mean I didn't make any money? Well, you did, and even though your income's really low, and it's below the standard deduction, you still owe self-employment tax because your business sold a profit, or ran a profit. It's hard to explain this stuff, but I feel like as enrolled agents, if someone comes to us as a client, we need to find a way to explain this and explain it, even if we're tired of explaining it, until they get it. It's how we add value where people that just, here's what you owe, sign your tax return, pay me my money, goodbye. It differentiates us from those kinds of shops. So there are 9 tests. Is the business conducted in a business-like manner? Yes, definitely. Books and records. What are some other things that would show that they're running this business like a business? Business plan is a good one. Separate bank accounts, separate credit cards, or at least an effort. I'll be honest with you, do as I say, not as I do. I have one credit card for everything because I want those points, but I'm really tiny business, and every month when it comes through, I have 3 different colors of highlighters, and I said, oh, what's me and the husband paying for? What am I paying for out of my personal slush fund, which is usually shoes and handbags? And what's the business paying for? And those are marked, scanned, and were anybody to ask, it is clear that those expenses, I separated them out as business expenses. And what do I have to prove it? Scanned receipts tied into the month, absolutely. Are they putting in some work? I don't, they're going to call it a business, but it's not really a business. I know someone who has kind of an artist-type business, but this person's not working all the time, and this person takes long vacations, and there's no announcement on their website that we're out of the office or the shop will be closed. I have a Chinese restaurant across the street from my house that every January they go back to China, and every January they put on the thing, currently closed for 20 days, see you in whenever. You just know. Does that mean they're not running a business because they take a long vacation? No. They've let their customers know. It's on their website too. I lost my pin. Does having an LLC automatically make a business a business? You get a filing requirement. Social media advice has been on the, it started for the first time in 2023. Social media tax advice is on the IRS's Dirty Dozen. Has been for the last 2 years. The latest one I saw was some variation of, I'm going to put my, we'll combine 2 code sections. I'm going to put my principal residence, 121, into an LLC and rent it to the business or pay the business rent or some such nonsense. And that way I can write off my mortgage. It never seems to end. And that touches on several different code sections, 121 being one of them, but 183 being another one. Do you really have a business here? Is there any economic substance there? Or are you just calling something a business with the hope that you can write it off? Sweat equity. Oh, sorry, next one. Does the taxpayer or the advisors know what they're doing? Now, there's no real, does that mean you can't? I was a technical writer, okay? Does that mean I can't do taxes for a living? Does that mean I can't change careers? No. But what it does mean is on changing that business or deciding to start that business, I need to acquire some education or I need to hire some people who know what they're doing. You're not allowed to just flounder around at it in perpetuity. You have to get, who said business plan? Yeah, have a business plan. Have a plan for eventually making some profits. How much sweat equity? The reason this 183 kind of got called the hobby loss rules is because you had people in W-2 jobs that were like doctors and lawyers that were putting in, those billable hours, right? 60, 70-hour weeks. And they're like, but I have a business doing whatever that's losing money. Well, how much time are you spending on the business? Oh, I don't know. If there's no football or baseball, maybe I work on a little bit on the weekend. If you have a situation like that, ask your client, even though they hate logs, consider tracking their hours and not guessing. When you work on that business, just jot down in your calendar when you started and when you ended. It doesn't have to be super precise, but it's contemporaneous. And it's tracking your sweat equity. Expectation of appreciation of assets pretty much goes without saying. I mean, if you're farming, there was a really great case last year. The taxpayers lost. They were expecting the land, they combined a bunch of stuff. So what they did was they combined a land investing business with chartered hunting trips. And the tax court, I believe, determined that those were indeed 2 separate businesses and that the hunting part of it that was generating these huge losses had to be separated from the land. They were hoping that the hunting business would offset the land appreciation business. Appreciation of assets, obviously, we're expecting that to appreciate. We're investors, we're speculators, that's a business. Has a taxpayer had success in business before in either similar or dissimilar activities? Have they ever run a successful business? Are they a serial entrepreneur that opens a business, gets it up to a certain point and sells it, creates another business? Or again, are they somebody who just seems to be floundering in perpetuity? History of income or losses. Is profit required? No. Is profit required eventually? Probably. There's a rebuttable presumption that a business is a hobby if it's had losses for 3 of the last 5 years or 2 of the last 7 if they're horses. It's interesting in the tax code, horses are a carve-out. Why? Horses are expensive. There's no real carve-out for cattle ranching, which in my neck of the woods, depending on drought or whatever, can have a run of non-profitability depending on market circumstances, weather, and any number of things. Commercial farming is another one. The important thing to take away here is that it is rebuttable. Kelly Erb, if you know her, the tax girl on Forbes, she wrote about a case where it was a minor child, and they wanted to breed bearded dragons as a business. And they did all the work, and they did all the research, and and we all know that sometimes businesses is like, wow, that is just a bad business model. You're never going to make any money doing that. You know, those of us who've been in business can kind of see when you've got a failure, you know, something's going to fail on your hands. It would take a miracle to ever have this business because of the labor involved or the time involved or the whims of the market. You know, bearded dragon, you know, if Disney makes a movie about bearded dragons, all of a sudden your bearded dragon business goes through the roof, but when that dies out, there it goes. The presumption is rebuttable, and she actually won a case, she's a tax attorney, where this bearded dragon business, it had lost more than the 3 of the 5 years. The IRS was trying to classify it as a hobby, and she's like, everything was laid out according to the 9 factors. Not can you do it, but can you defend it? When you're working with clients like this, it's really important. How many of you were in the tech session this morning? This morning? Yeah, this morning. Yeah, you guys, of course. The front row raises their hand. One of you put up, oh, it was Brad, all his Schedule Cs. He pulled out all his Schedule Cs, and he was running some data analytics on it. You don't even necessarily have to have data analytics, but you can set up automations with your mail program and your tax software and your ChatGPT. Gee, hi ChatGPT. Can you please, I'm seeing a lot of people not keeping up their business records, or I'm seeing a lot of people who aren't making a profit. Can you write me something that will explain this? And again, how many of you hate writing email? Right? You do it, and it's a distraction. It takes away from your focus work, and you're like, use your automation tools. Just keep the personal information out of it. Use your automation tools to help you explain these kinds of things to your clients over and over, and it will take the over and over out of it. You will develop a library of these common scenarios. How many have you have a client that's been a W-2 forever that comes to you and says, I want to start a business. I'm thinking of this. What do I need to know? Can I set up a consult? You can have a library of information that can talk to them about these 9 factors and how to ensure that their business is business in front of the IRS, even if it loses money. Amount of occasional profits. How many of you have these? I'm a loser, I'm a loser, I'm a loser. Oh, this year I made money. I'm a loser, I'm a loser, I'm a loser. This year I made money. And you rarely have 2 or 3 profit years in a row. It's always like a few years of losses and then boom, hey, look, we've got a profit. That's the horse problem. It's the horse problem. It's a problem elsewhere too. And again, Brad's data analytics, if you were there this morning, that's one of those things where it's going to help you because it's going to help you ferret out the bad actors. It's going to help you cover your assets because you can say, I'm looking at you and the analytics are showing that, hey, this year or every year that you have a loss, or every year that you're showing profits, your marketing budget tanks or your equipment budget tanks. It can help you identify bad actors. It can also help you help your clients protect themselves in the event those returns get examined. But yeah, you can't just have... You can. Businesses have occasional profits. I often tell my clients, my new clients that are starting up, especially when they're fairly capital intensive, the IRS doesn't expect... How many years did Amazon and Facebook lose money before they were profitable? A lot. Okay? I don't have the data. Where's my front row? But they lost money for many, many, many years they're going through venture capital like crazy. Is anybody doubting that Amazon and Facebook are businesses? No. And your clients don't need to work to that level, but they need to understand that you're smart enough to be able to tell the difference between legitimate occasional profits and occasional profits that are there trying to avoid scrutiny. And the IRS's data analytics, if you think your data analytics are good, when the IRS's data analytics are working, they're gonna find you. Taxpayers' financial status, we talked about this. Once had a client ask me, really high-income client, all W-2. I mean, just, they're getting killed, right? And they kind of know they're getting killed. Well, should I write a book to save money on taxes? If you set out, and I explain this to clients, and I'm sure you do too, you're in business to make money. And one of the mantras in my office there at Tax Therapy is, make all the money. I always tell my clients, be good capitalists in your business. Make all your money, plan for the taxes. You're not going to be able to, if you are setting up a business to lose money, you have not set up a business. You have an activity that's not engaged in for profit. And that means all those expenses is just money flying out of your pocket. I hate this one. Elements of personal pleasure or recreation. Horses. Racing cars or boats. Charter fishing. Charter hunting. Farming and ranching. I object to the farming and ranching because anybody that's worked on or around a farm or a ranch knows that, yeah, you're outside and that may seem pleasurable to people with a desk job, but it's not always just pure fun. I don't think it was in my bio, but I'm a fiber junkie person. Oh, who's doing the scavenger hunt? Who's doing the scavenger hunt? The little green slip of paper they gave you when you signed up? Knitting. I'm your person who likes knitting, if you're doing that. So for a while, it was one of those meme things where everybody was having an alpaca ranch. Have you ever seen an alpaca? They're cute, right? They're so cute. Everybody's like, I'm going to start me an alpaca ranch to lose money. Now, there was a whole set of those people. And believe me, any kind of ranching, it's hard to make money. But if you've ever knit or spun yarn from alpaca fleece, you will know that alpaca fleece is not inexpensive. And so just because the animal they happen to be farming or ranching is cute, does not mean that they are not in business. That's why we have 9 factors instead of just 1. Any questions on that? Yep. It doesn't. It doesn't. Those are going to be completely separate tests. Okay? This is, are you running a business? Now, again, you don't have to have a partnership if you just jointly own the property. That's one of the things, unless you slap LLC on the end of it, and then, whoo, you got lots of fun. But generally, joint ownership of, for instance, a residential rental property does not mean that residential rental property is not a business. Just because you didn't put an LLC on it, you're not calling it a partnership, it's just a joint ownership. What are some of the things that are going to tell me that is that rental endeavor between 2 unrelated parties that aren't a partnership? What are some of the things that are going to tell me that is not an activity gauged in for profit, that it doesn't rise to the level of a 162? There's a business code section. I've got a business one with a lot more sections. What are some things? That's the biggest one. Are you going with fair market rent? Do you have regular contractors that are taking care of the property? Are you regularly advertising as soon as that property is vacant? Those types of things. Do you necessarily have to have a business plan? No, but if your plan long-term is to bootstrap the rents into more properties, Write that down, because all that's going to do is give you more documentation. Okay? And I know, how many of you guys, you've always been a tax pro? Tax pro your whole life. Okay, inherited from tax pros. A lot of us, me not included, bad at documentation. Really, really bad at documentation, as are our clients. I'm going to go back to this morning's session. Those automations and the augmented and artificial intelligence, as scary as they sound, they can really help you and help you help your clients ensure that you have the documentation needed. I once had to do a backwards 183 audit. I had an 80-year-old client, like in his 80s, and he was paying New Mexico gross receipts tax because he was like an antique flipper, and he'd go around to like garage sales, like American Pickers, he'd go around to garage sales and stuff, get these little tchotchkes, clean them up, take them to this booth he had at an antique mall and sell them for spending cash. We reported the spending cash. He paid his gross receipts tax. The IRS sends him a letter. You should be paying self-employment tax on that. And we basically had to go through the 9 factors, but one of the factors was profit motive. It's like the only reason this guy has a profit is because he's puttering. He has no books and records. He's a putterer. He does this when he feels like it. So it was not conducted in a business-like manner. There was no separate bank accounts. He's in his 80s. He's got Social Security income. He's got a pension. He's got investments. He's doing this for his mind. It is a true hobby. And the last point we made was that the only reason it even had a profit was because we weren't writing off any of his expenses. The second we start writing off expenses, nope, there goes his profit. But it was just something for him to do. And he did the right thing. He claimed his income. Oh, yeah, totally won. Absolutely. Henry's trying to trap me. Henry asked, and that's in my business code class. Henry asked, can you use I call them the robot overlords. Can you use your robot overlords to backdoor the Cohen rule? And I'm going to throw out a maybe on that, Henry, because the robot overlords certainly know what the Cohen rule is. Where I would expect the robot overlords to get tripped up is where? Any guesses? It's code section, but it's a business code section. 274. The things that require additional substantiation, your mileage log, your travel and entertainment expenses. You can maybe backdoor some Cohen with the robot overlords. That's an interesting something for one of you front row boys to try, is to see if you could give a business, I'm under audit, and my books and records were lost in a flood. We just had a flood in Roswell. There's one in Juneau. We had big floods that affected a lot of our friends and family in North Carolina and Florida. So things get lost. You can rebuild them. Everybody knows what the Cohen rule is, right? Oh, knows. Okay, I'm sorry. It's named after George M. Cohen, the conductor. Like many artists and creatives, many, not all, he was not such a good record keeper. And he got audited. Surprise, surprise. And what the tax court did was they allowed Cohen to rebuild or fabricate some of his expenses. So, and not out of thin air, but, the man plays the piano, so he would reasonably expect to have some piano and tuning expenses. He would reasonably be expected to have some string expenses. He would reasonably be expected to rent some studio space. Where we run into trouble is he was, writing off entertainment expenses. Those are now subject to additional substantiation rules under 274. Al Capone, also famous, probably could have skated by and not gotten that tax conviction if he had just, tried a little harder to file a return, even if it was a dodgy return. So that's what the Cohen rule is. It allows you to go back and rebuild, usually, and the tax court has said this. Typically, a taxpayer that keeps books and records is going to have much more in terms of expenses than anything that could be come up with under Cohen. However, again, Henry makes the point, I have a client with this kind of business. Client is being audited. This is what we're telling our robot overlords as a prompt. Client is being audited. What are the types of expenses and what would be reasonable amounts? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, ChatGPT, not so good with the mathy bits. Can't count. But there are ways, and we can go back, you can go back to your data analytics, pull out similar businesses for other clients, those types of things. So can you use it to backdoor? Maybe. It's something that if you're doing a lot of rep work for these types of businesses and people that may get stuck using Cohen, that you're going to want to spend some of your copious amounts of free time messing about with in the software. Any more questions? I'm going to get all up in this one. I've taught an entire, hour, Brad? Hour? 2 hours? I've taught an entire class just on 7216. Disclosure or use of information by preparers of returns. Let's just go back for 1 sec. This is one where you're not allowed to do it, but it also carries a civil penalty. If you'll notice, this is in the 7,000s of the Internal Revenue Code. How many of you spend some time with the code? Cheryl. Cheryl Travado's in the back row. She spends some time with the code. The code has, people are like, oh, it doesn't make any sense. No, it makes beautiful sense. It really does. If you've got a partnership issue, where are you looking in the code? 700s. Corporations? Subchapter C, but the 300s, yeah. It's got, there are entire sections. I don't do anything foreign or international. There are entire chunks, I don't know the numbers, and I call a friend, right? Got a referral for you because I don't deal with these parts of the code. But 7216 deals specifically with disclosure or use of information by preparers of returns. And the reason I talk about it in this class as a must-know code section is because I see a lot of violations. Do I see a lot of flagrant, I'm going to go blab in my client's info violations? No. I see a lot of inadvertent violations. You've got permissible disclosures to the IRS and the courts, but you don't automatically have to respond to a subpoena. What are you going to do if somebody subpoenas you for your client's tax records? What's the first call you make? You move into quash? What's the first call you make if you get a subpoena? Oh, 50 minutes, that was my flag. Yeah, I'm halfway done. See, we're almost done here, even though we've only got 2 more sections, because this is a huge one. You're going to call one of 2 people. You're going to call your attorney. How many of you guys have an attorney that you just pick up the phone and call and they're there? Okay, that's awesome. And Brad texts his attorney. Wow. You're my new best friend. Sorry, Josh, you're out of here. Right. Most of us and most of our clients, you always see the cop shows. I'm going to call my attorney. You call my attorney. Most of us don't have somebody that's just kind of at the beck and call like that. The other place you should call, who knows the next best place if you don't have that kind of litigation support? That's right, your E&O carrier. NAEA has great, you can get E&O insurance. If you don't have it, Brad pointed out, you must have it. Cybersecurity. Most of the E&O carriers also offer cybersecurity data breach type insurance. But yes, you can call your E&O provider because what do they have? Lawyers on staff who are there to help you. Permissible disclosure would be you can use the client's information for their state and local returns. Y'all out here, you got Pennsylvania with locals and Ohio with locals. Quality and peer reviews. So you're figuring, oh, I could just hand it off to somebody else in my office. Is that true? No. No, you can't hand it off to just anybody. And this is where we get into that fine print. I'm going to read, which I don't normally do. A quality or peer review may be conducted, oops, sorry about that. I'm trying to get over, oh, that's weird. Okay, a quality or peer review may be conducted only by attorneys, CPAs, EAs, and enrolled actuaries who are eligible to practice before the IRS. So is everybody in here an EA or CPA? Anybody in AFSP? Non? Okay. Important to know, in any case, that a permissible disclosure for review, if you're doing the return and you hand it off to the AFSP in your office for a second set of eyeballs, no. It needs to go up the chain of command to an enrolled preparer. Contractors. This is that big inadvertent one. It's the big inadvertent one that nobody likes. Some of my least favorite words in the whole world are, my IT guy handles all of that. Brad's probably said it once or twice in his classes, if you've taken his classes on security. Who has the ultimate authority if a mistake's made on a tax return, the tax return gets filed? Where does the buck stop? With the taxpayer. The buck stops. That taxpayer signs that hopefully had a chance to review, signed that return, said, or the e-file authorization said it was fine for you to file, looked good to them. When there's a mistake, we tell the taxpayer, you had an opportunity to review, looks good to me, we're in the hustle bustle, the buck stops with you. Well, turnabout is fair play, ladies and gentlemen. The buck stops with us, not our IT contractors. You don't have to, as Brad says, be a cybersecurity expert and know everything about how your firewall is installed and yada, yada, yada. But you need to not be the Willie Nelson or Billy Joel or whoever, Wesley Snipes, of the tax world and just say, oh, I've got people for that, and think that that absolves you. It does not. So your IT contractor and any other contractor that has access to the information on your computer, they're a de facto tax return preparer under the law. Do you know what that means? It means that all of a sudden, and they hate this, you have to tell them, by having access to my files, unless you can somehow create a system, and I'm a little on the paranoid side. If you know me, you know that. Unless you create a system where an IT contractor cannot access, I won't let anybody remote into my system. I'll just flat out, can I remote, take control, see what's on your screen? No. You can tell me the steps, and I will do the steps. Nobody remotes into my system. You let somebody remote into your system, even if they're a contractor, troubleshooting, software vendor, blah, 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 you have made them a de facto preparer, and they are subject to all of these use and disclosure laws. That's why I do not allow them into my system. I make them walk me through it. And again, if you're sitting here in shell shock going, oh my gosh, but I need software support, and sometimes that's the easiest, one single best way to do that, I'm not here to tell you what to do or what not to do. What I'm telling you is that's an exposure for you. It is a potential 7216 disclosure. If, for example, your software vendor had a data breach, you're their client. They have to do all the data breachy stuff. But all your clients were just now exposed because they had a breach. It's gnarly and not fun. And so what I'm asking you or reminding you to do on this 7216 is get to know it and the fine print and work that into your risk assessments and work that into your WISPs, how you're going to handle those types of situations. Hang on a second, Henry. Other return preparers, we've talked about that. Fiduciaries. Brad, I keep referring, this morning's session was excellent, wasn't it? How do you know the fiduciaries are really a fiduciary? Oh, hi, I'm calling because my mom was your client and she died, or auntie so-and-so was your client and she died. And how are you vetting those people? Okay, yeah, Henry. I don't know that off the top of my head. I definitely think it's something to consider. One of the things that I will tell you about the cloud is if it's on, it can be hacked. And so by having everything in the cloud, and again, there are really good reasons to have it in the cloud. Do you have to disclose cloud-based software? Your tax software you're allowed to use, it's going to depend, honestly. And it's a good question. Intuit would never do that, try to poach your clients.
Void the contract, but your data's still out there.
Yes. And so, and Brad touches on this. How many of you actually read the EULA, the end user license? I have one hand. You two?
I read Microsoft's.
Brad not only reads it, he gives it to his lawyer to check out. You don't know. And that's one of my biggest things with 7216 is you don't know unless you're reading very carefully what's being done with your data or your client's data. So, again, it's an awareness issue there. Permissible disclosure, death or incapacitation of the preparer. Matt and I have actually talked about this in one of our practice management classes. We don't want y'all dying at your desks. We don't want you to... How many of you have gotten clients from somebody that's like, my last year's preparer died and they filed an extension for me and now I don't have anybody? Okay, yeah, that's a permissible disclosure, but there's fine print in the regs. Related taxpayers. How many of you have done the college kids' taxes? How many of you have gotten the college kid to sign a 7216 disclosure so that you could talk to their parents about the tax return because their parents were paying the bill? Anybody who's done an adult child's tax return and has said anything about that child to the parent, you need to I get it on GP. I won't even usually talk. Like, oh, did they get a refund? I'm like, you're going to have to ask them. Okay? You already know they're a client because, they've been a client since they were getting the child tax credit. So clearly you know they're a client. But when it comes to that adult child's tax situation, and everyone's different. I have a group of young women who are like, nope, you can talk to my mom about anything. I get those 7216s because they don't understand it. Their mom's happy. But when everything's great until it isn't, right? All of a sudden, people become estranged. You need that disclosure on file. And you need to be aware that you can't just toot on those related taxpayers. Solicitation of tax return business. Is that bookkeeping business? No. Is that advisory? No. You can use lists and your data analytics to solicit additional tax return business from your clients. Hey, I'm opening up my books, and I am now taking referrals for a limited number of new clients, if you know anybody, and you can send that out to everybody. However, you can't just use it and you certainly can't use it for your side hustle. I'm selling jewelry or whatever you're doing on the side. Your insurance business. My mom did taxes and insurance. She could certainly, because the rules are different, no 7216, she could certainly go out to all her insurance clients and say, hey, did you know I also do taxes? But she can't go out to the tax clients and say, buy your insurance from me. Questions? You have to get taxpayer consent. Possibly related taxpayers, possibly applications. Brad talked about this morning, and Josh talked about Zapier. As a matter of course in my business, every year I ask my clients to sign off on which applications I can disclose their information to. I have policies in place about what gets disclosed. How many of you use applications in your business outside of your tax software? A mass mailer, something like Zapier. I have a texting dashboard, okay, where they can't text my cell phone. That's a big ol' nope. I can have those forwarded if I choose. I ask my clients, and how many of you sign up for these apps and they're like, oh, just extract your client list and dump it into our software? Are you giving that any thought at all? I would encourage as a best practice when you're using an integrated application that is not specific to tax, that you consider what information you provide. For example, my text dashboard gets my client's name and their mobile number. It does not get their email. It does not get their physical address. It does not get any information other than the bare minimum that application needs to do its job, and I get the client's permission to provide that. If they want to get texts, they have to provide their permission. It requires specific language and formatting, and I've caught some very knowledgeable preparers out in this one. Well, I just include a blanket consent for all my applications in my engagement letter. By agreeing to have me do your taxes, I will be using Zapier and Textalent and, I don't know, whatever, the MailChimp, boop, 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 all of them, okay? No. Rev Proc 2013-14 requires a separate sheet of paper. It has to be obvious. You can't bury it in your engagement letter. A duration of consent needs to be specified. There's a specific font size. You can't EULA them. You can't put it in a 6.5-point font and flash it up on the screen for 5 seconds and say, check the box if you accept. It has to have a specific font size. And there's specific language that has to be included. It's in the RevProc. Any questions on that? Correct. And there are ways to change the default font. How many of y'all are Microsoft Office 365 users? Word, Excel? Yeah. Okay, so the one thing you want to know, Microsoft tries to help you. I actually get my clients' consent to use Microsoft Office 365. Because, what do I use those things for? Mail merges and things like that. I still have clients. My niche, if I have a niche, I deal with elderly clients. And so a lot of them are extremely tech savvy, but they still like to get their stuff on paper, which I don't have a problem with. And so if I'm mailing things and using mail merges, Microsoft Office applications are not tax return preparation software. So if I'm keeping a database of all my clients who get mailed engagement kits, and I'm using Excel and Word to make a mail merge of that, that is a potential non-permissible disclosure, and I'm one of those people that tends to err on the side of caution. So yes, and you definitely want to check your fonts. It has to be 12-point, which is fairly large. Any other questions about that? 7216 is a huge deal, and it comes with both civil and the potential for criminal penalties. Here's one. It's a favorite. For those of you studying for the tax court exam, you will know this inside, out, left, right, diagonal. Huh, Cheryl? Yeah. Okay. Timely mailings treated as timely filing and paying seems so, again, it's kind of like 61, right? Well, Amber, that's so obvious, so painfully obvious. The devil, as always, is in the details on this one. It's called the mailbox rule. I'm looking around. Even I remember, I'm kind of middle of the road, EA, Gen X. Even I remember people like lining up. did y'all hear? People were lined up at the post office this October. They said the post office had like record numbers of people mailing their returns that were on the extension deadline. So, and believe it or not, I mean, I have a P.O. box at one of the busiest post offices in my town, and every year during tax season, lines of people mailing, you would not believe, people, I still use the public library, people at the library picking up paper tax forms, and they are paper filing. With 325 million returns, Brad, filed. Anybody up on the IRS? That sounds about right. 325 million tax returns, individual 1040s, get filed. Even a relatively low percentage of that is a big number, okay? So there are still people out there dropping it off. How do you prove it? Not can you do it, can you defend it? The postage has to be paid. You can't drop it off with no stamps and say, oh, but I dropped it in the mail. Postage to stamps. It has to be properly addressed. So if you pay the postage, how many of you have actually been to a physical post office? I send a lot of certified mail. How many of you have sent certified mail recently? What do they do now? They ask you to confirm the address, right? And I had one, I've actually had two. I had a friend that recently moved to South Carolina, and she told me her address was something, something island. But when the zip code came up, it was Beaufort, okay? And then I had one I was sending to something, Alabama, zip code. Oh, no, that's Birmingham, okay? They're verifying the addresses. So this isn't going to happen if you take the time to take it to the post office because they're verifying addresses. But if your envelope isn't properly addressed, you transpose something in the zip code or whatever causes it to go astray, that can blast a hole in your defense that it was timely filed. Has to be, obviously, it has to actually get into the mailbox or to the post office. And it has to be in an appropriate envelope or wrapper, which ought to go without saying. Yes, sir?
Individual returns, 9.3% were mailed.
9.3%. So, okay, so do my math for me. So just say roughly 10% of, 30 million people. 30 million tax returns. Okay? So you can see it's a small percentage, but it's still a big, big raw number. And yes, that does perhaps, here's Amber's little hobby horse. How many of you would just love some sort of IRS PIN that's tied to your EA number that would let you e-file for dead taxpayer? I deal with elderly clients. I file a lot of paper returns. It's sad, but it is true. I'm hoping one day the IRS will find a way to fix that for at least tax return preparers, tax professionals enrolled, to where we're vetted that we can electronically file for a deceased taxpayer. These are computers, they could fix it. You do if you're filing the tax return, hopefully you're working with the fiduciary of the estate, and hopefully you've vetted them. Yeah, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I do think it's going to be possible. And Henry's right, yeah, you have to, you can respect the impulse, okay? They want to make sure that you have authority to file that tax return or do that representation for your client. They want to make sure that the client is the client, that you are you, that the fiduciary is really the fiduciary. Unfortunately, what I have found, and again, it's hobby horse, sometimes the IRS loses the forest for the trees. It's like, what do you need to prove that I'm the authorized representative? And what do you need to prove that the authorized representative or fiduciary for the estate is a fiduciary? And I can send you all of that stuff. And believe me, if you kind of jump on that and give them the forest, Sometimes they don't get lost in the trees. It's still lots and lots of pages. Valid postmarks. Postage meters are okay. Y'all in the tax court exam are going to learn this. The court cases are in your tax. At one point, the tax court said that USPS stamp overruled whatever was on the postage meter date. That got reversed on appeal. Tax court reversed its decision. The controlling case, oh God, Cheryl, why am I blanking on this one? I always call it the stamps.com case, but that's Tilden, yeah. Yes, if you even just Google stamps.com tax court case, the actual case is going to come up, and they are in your text. If the postcard, and how many of you go to certified mail but you don't look at the little green and white thing to see that the stamp is legible? You know, they hand cancel it. That's the benefit of going into the post office for certified mail, right? If it's evident, but it's illegible, there wasn't enough ink, they jiggled it, is that an 8? Or, it's my favorite question, is that an 8 or is it a 3? You're laughing because you do it too. Is that a 6 or an 8? Taxpayer has the burden of proof. External evidence is allowed. This was timely filed, this was timely filed, we timely filed this. External evidence is allowed. Here's my receipt. It has the same number as the computer printed, not this ink stamp. It has the same number as this tracking, or as this certified mail receipt. I can tie that date, so yes, the postmark may be illegible, but look, here's the receipt, paid for it on the same day. Okay? One hopes that it never gets to this level, but you just, forewarned is forearmed. If there is no postmark present, I've had this happen. Well, I've had this other thing happen. How many of you have gotten a package or an envelope in the mail and the stamp hasn't been canceled? Yeah. That probably happens more than this, but if the postmark is not present, okay, so what if the post office doesn't cancel it? On one of your weird, it's like, oh, I'm just going to send this first class mail. It's 2 pages. Yes, you certainly can. So if for whatever reason the post office doesn't get that thing canceled and it still shows up at the IRS and they say they didn't get it timely, it wasn't timely mailed, therefore it wasn't timely filed, if the postmark is absent, you can't use that receipt. Really late deliveries. The taxpayer has to prove that there's timely deposit and that the delay was the fault of the Postal Service. I had, at one time I did have a lawyer, and I asked her for a W-9 so that, issue the 1099. And I eventually got another one, but she was in Chama, New Mexico, which is about, I don't know, it's around an hour from where I live. It took 6 months to get to my office P.O. box. When it finally showed up, it looked like it had been stomped on the way it was walked to the office. I had no way of proving that was the fault of the post, even though I knew it had gotten lost. And so you have to consider this. So what are our best practices? What are our best practices? Certified mail. I don't always get return receipt because I have been told the IRS hates it. And I don't see any reason to antagonize them. And the certified mail has a tracking number where you can see. What I will do is when I see that it got there, how many of you know how to use the snipping tool on your computer? I take a screenshot. It was delivered on such and such a day, and that goes in the tax file. I don't care if they said they haven't gotten it. The post office says they did get it. Question? So he's using priority mail with signature confirmation. Cheryl? What they consider an approved delivery method. So priority is great, okay? And priority is a little less expensive. What I have been told from, I'm friends, my post office people, they see me all the time, and so we're kind of buds, and so I ask them questions. Certified mail theoretically gets handled a little more carefully. Priority mail, yes, you have tracking, but I have had priority mail do quite a long walkabout. I had priority mail go through Iowa to get from Albuquerque to Las Vegas, Nevada. So it's good for tracking, but again, if the situation is on the line where it's really, really important, you want to use that certified. Do you always have to get a signature confirmation? For the IRS, not always. When you're disengaging a client, priority with signature. Oh, I know you got this. Don't try to tell me you didn't get me telling you you needed X, Y, or Z. Okay, we've got a few people who do. Oh, now you tell me because I just filed my first one of those ever. I did ask the client, I prepared the letter and I asked the client, I said, sign this and please submit it via certified mail as a remote client. And he needed to sign, I want a wet signature. So I'm like, I prepared everything, download it, sign it, scan me the signed copy, and then scan me the certified mail receipt so that we can prove that you timely filed that election because we were running up. He was like, oh, hey, by the way, I need to do this by October 12th. I was like, thanks, dude. Yeah, 30 days. It ends in a week, right? 3 days before the deadline. Private delivery services. And this speaks to a certain extent to what Cheryl was talking about. Not all United States Postal Service products qualify. I'm like the goddess of the post office where I live because I know all the rules. Well, I see like rookies coming in and it's like, no, you don't need that. Here, you need this form. And so, oops, there went my glasses. Not all USPS has an overnight. You know that? Is it a guaranteed overnight? No. Priority mail, 2 to 3 day delivery. But that's not a hard and fast. It's like a rule of thumb, okay? They leave themselves an out for that. Notice 2016-30 sets the list of approved delivery services. FedEx, only certain FedEx when it absolutely, y'all remember that, absolutely positively has to be there overnight. So, but again, timely mailed is timely filed as a rule, general rule. There are always exceptions. The list for that, notice 2016-30 set the original list of approved delivery services, private delivery service, your FedEx, your DHL, your UPS, brown truck. List is maintained online. They change. Do not assume because you've always done it that way is going to cover you all the time. It may not. Go out there online, and if you got the text, I think Corrine sent out the PDFs of my text. The PDFs of my text, the links are normally live. If you click the link, it will take you right to the list, if the link's in there. It's been a while since I wrote that. All right. Also, proper mailing addresses for use with delivery by PDS. What was one of the things for timely mailing? It had to be properly addressed. Service centers are coming and going. Where to send? It's online. I have it bookmarked because I don't just assume that because most of my clients send to XYZ in Ogden that the IRS hasn't changed their mind and started mailing those to Fresno or Cincinnati or wherever. Definitely go online to check. And note that, yes, if the client's sending a payment, it often goes to one place. And if they're not sending a payment, it will often go to a different place. Electronic filing. I don't know if I see people every year. So I'm paranoid, but I'm not much of a panicker, and I'm not a fan of drama. I don't stay in my office until midnight when those acknowledgments from the MEF system start slowing down. I don't wait for them. Why don't I wait for them? Because we have 5 days to perfect and resubmit. So if I filed my last return and the acts are coming in slow, I just I'm one of those people that shuts my computer down. I shut my computer down. I go have an adult beverage, and I come back to the office in the morning and check my acts. And I have 5 days to resubmit. You have 10 days. How many of you are paper filing returns? Dead people or just any other reasons? Well, if it's been a while since you've done a paper filed returns take a while to assemble, especially when you don't do it but a couple of times a year. I mean, if you've got a client that you know you're always paper filing, that comes together pretty fast, just like something you're familiar with. But man, I can't tell you the number of times, it usually happens with New Mexico. You forgot to attach a 1099. And lately the IRS is saying, where's your 1099? And it's like, dude, you have that information. And they're like, send it anyway, because you got nothing better to do. In any case, you have 10 days to paper file a return. What's one of the most common reasons for an electronically filed return to be rejected where you would have to file it on paper? Not a dead person. The kid files. That's exactly it. Or I have cases where the estranged parents file. You know, there's a divorce, and I used to call them racers. Race to the mailbox. And the custodial parent legitimately is entitled to all those credits, but the non-custodial parent, just for kicks and giggles, has decided to go ahead and take them.
He really wants that AOTC.
Yeah. So that's, if it bounces, you have 10 days to get it filed on paper. Additional time may not be available for certain statutory deadlines. How many of you heard about the guy who waited till the last minute to electronically file his tax court petition? There was a glitch, and the tax court does not care. He was like 11 seconds late after midnight. Now, I know Cheryl's a USTCP. Any other USTCPs in this room? You shouldn't be filing tax court petitions for your clients if you're not a tax court practitioner. However, sometimes clients, you'll tell them you have to file a pro se petition. Just do it. This guy, for whatever, I read it's a small one, it's no big whoop, whatever. 11 seconds late. Either his internet was slow or something else happened. The tax court dismissed the case for lack of jurisdiction because the petition was filed late. Which brings me to my next point. And I will admit to being, this is another one of those famous do as I say, not as I do. And why you need to learn to code. Because the code and the regs specify timely mailed is timely filed, usually. But there are a host of exceptions, especially in the representation field, where something has to be received by the IRS in order to be considered timely. So if rep work is a part of your practice, but it's not what you do exclusively, it's not where you live, be conscientious about confirming, is that 30-day or 60-day deadline time to get stuff into the mail, or do they need to have it in their hand? Okay? Because it can matter, and it's appropriate due diligence on your part. You don't want, yes, it's probably covered by your E&O, but you really want to have to admit to your E&O insurance that you didn't realize it had to be delivered, not mailed, when it's so simple to just look it up. Any questions? We've got about 10 minutes left. I got 10, right? Yeah. Any more questions? How many of you knew about the military thing? I live in Military State Central, and my client had to tell me, hey, I think we get, and it wasn't an after the fact thing. It was just oh, by the way, I've heard that there's a blah. We don't want to always assume that the clients are trying to put one over on us. It's always worth looking up. One of the reasons I taught this class, how many of you as experienced practitioners heard something that you had forgotten, or maybe that you had never heard before in this class on one of these sections? A few of you. Yeah. It's real easy to forget what you know, or to think you know and not realize. One of the things I see occasionally on social media is people conflate two different ideas. They'll mix, somebody brought up the partnership, the joint ownership of property, okay? And it's like, Natalie will tell you, there's a whole difference between, and this is outside of this because these are business code sections, but there's a whole different thing between passive activity loss rules and is this a trade or business? And it behooves you to get used to using the code and the regs. Hopefully you know that the regs, how the regs are structured. There's usually a 1 and a dot, and then the corresponding code section, and then, gosh, one of the ones I looked up, I can't remember what I was looking it up for. It might have been charity. It's like 37 sub-regs under, I don't know, 408A, but that's not what it was. But the other thing, and I'll be honest with you, I'm a literature major. Computers were made to do my math for me. Can I do the math? Yes. Do I ever? I will admit to hand calculating depreciation for fun. Okay? A couple of times. But by and large, I am not the one that wants to count the days and calculate the exclusion. But how are you going to know if the exclusion was calculated correctly if you don't have some kind of idea what the rules are and how the formula works? That's why you go to the code. That's why you go to the regs. I will tell you there are classes out there, I don't teach them, on deciphering the legalese of the code. So kind of how to parse the languages. How many of you are old enough to remember diagramming sentences in school? They will teach you how to read the code through a strategy similar to diagramming the sentences. Find the subject, find the verb, find the modifiers. Is it a shall or is it a may? One of the things that is problematic about the code. How many of you have the books? The code books? Link on the thing. Okay, so when I moved out of my physical office space into my home office space, my code and regs had to go. There just wasn't room. My house is tiny. Electronic links are good, but they don't lend themselves to scanning. And when I say scanning, I mean skimming through the hope the algorithm works. One of the resources that you can do, if you're in an area that has one, that I will sometimes do when the electronic copy may be failing me, or if I'm writing something, or just doing some research on something, client comes to you with your problem, and you're like, wow, that's going to have to dig in, going to have to research that. At your local law library. I have to pay for parking at mine, but I can go in and use all the online databases, and the law library often will have a copy of the tax code and the regs right there. Or you get your friend who has an actual physical office, and they let you come in and sit in the conference room and use it. There are advantages to being able to kind of see and flip back and forth and skim through the subheadings, because as I said earlier, the code is arranged in an order that does make sense. There are a few exceptions. I'll give you a notable exception. Where are collectibles, the taxation of collectibles, included in the Internal Revenue? What? 408M. And who knows what 408M2 is besides me and Matt? Retirement, right. All that retirement stuff like your 401k, right? And 403B, you're there in the Why are collectibles in with the retirement stuff? No. There's a real reason. Because they're prohibited transactions inside a retirement account. And that's why collectibles are defined there. So again, it comes down to not being afraid. Look, we all use social media, okay? We all ask our buddies for help. But when you're you want your buddies or your trusted social media folks that you follow that help you, if they're not giving you a code section or a reg, you need to question that, or you need to know where to find it. And the code should not be intimidating to you. The regs should not be intimidating to you. The language can be a little off-putting, but I don't know. I listen to a lot of football talk in the morning, whether I want to or not, and sometimes that's like way up here with my understanding of the game. The more you're in it, the more you understand, the easier it gets. So don't be afraid of being a code head. Okay? Any other questions? Then I'm going to let y'all go to your, there's a happy hour, cocktail hour. Yeah, that was Brad. He's had a rough day. Cocktail reception at 7 o'clock this evening, so hope to see you all there. I'll be there. And you guys, if you're looking for me, you can find me here, and that's in your slide deck. I answer questions, even research questions during tax season. My practice is very small.